In July 1405, 87 years before Christopher Columbus would sail west across the Atlantic, a fleet of more than 300 ships left the Chinese port of Suzhou. The fleet was the largest naval force the world had ever seen. The largest ships, called treasure ships or baoshan, were 120 meters long, 8 times the length of Columbus's flagship Santa Maria. They had 9 masts. They could carry 300 crew. They could displace 1,500 tons. The fleet carried 27,000 sailors, soldiers, and craftsmen. It was commanded by an admiral named Zheng, a Muslim eunuch from southwest China who had risen to become one of the most trusted officials of the Ming Dynasty Emperor Yanli. Over the next 28 years, Zheng would lead 7 major expeditions across the Indian Ocean, reaching East Africa, the Persian Gulf, and the eastern coast of India. His fleets carried Chinese silks, ceramics, and silver. They brought back spices, gold, and exotic animals, including the first giraffe ever seen in China, presented to the emperor as the legendary Qilin. They established Chinese diplomatic and trade relationships with 37 countries from Java to Mogadishu. Then in 1433, the Ming Emperor Xuande ordered the expeditions stopped. The ships were left to rot at their docks. The records of the voyages were partially destroyed. The shipyards were closed. The maritime expertise was lost. China, which had been on the verge of becoming the great seafaring civilization of the early modern world, turned its back on the ocean. Within 60 years, Spanish and Portuguese ships would dominate global maritime trade. Within a century, the technological gap between Chinese and European naval engineering would be insurmountable. The story of Zheng is one of the great alternate histories of human civilization. We have been trying to reconstruct what was lost ever since. To understand the voyages, you have to understand the dynasty. The Ming dynasty was founded in 1368 by a peasant rebel named Zhu Yuanzhang, who took the imperial title Hangu. He had ousted the Mongol Yuan dynasty that had ruled China for 90 years. The Hangu emperor focused inward, rebuilding agriculture and reasserting Chinese cultural identity. His son Yanli, who came to power in 1402 through a brutal civil war, took a different approach. He moved the capital from Nanjing to Beijing. He commissioned the Forbidden City. He sponsored the editing of the Yongle Encyclopedia, the largest reference work compiled in human history at the time. He wanted to project Chinese power outward. He commissioned the treasure fleet. The first expedition, in 1405, sailed to Kampa, modern central Vietnam, then to Java, then to Calicut on the southwestern coast of India. The second, in 1407, repeated and extended this route. The third reached the Persian Gulf. The fourth, in 1413, reached the African coast at Malindi in modern Kenya. By the seventh and final expedition, completed in 1433, Zheng's fleet had reached the Red Sea, possibly Mecca, and may have circumnavigated the African continent in advance of Vasco da Gama. The technical sophistication of the fleet was extraordinary. The treasure ships used watertight bulkhead compartments, a Chinese innovation that European ships would not adopt for another 400 years. They had highly accurate magnetic compasses, navigation manuals based on stellar observation, and detailed sea charts. They had seasoned crews drawn from the maritime communities of Fujian and Guangdong. The fleet carried Chinese diplomats, religious scholars, doctors, and translators. It was, in effect, a floating embassy capable of negotiating treaties, suppressing piracy, and projecting imperial power across the Indian Ocean. The voyages were diplomatic and trade-oriented rather than colonial. Zheng typically presented gifts to local rulers, established formal tribute relationships, and exchanged ambassadors. He also engaged in some military action. The fleet defeated a Sumatran pirate king in 1406. It intervened in a succession crisis in Ceylon in 1409, capturing the local king and bringing him to China. It generally avoided major colonial occupation, though it did establish Chinese diaspora communities at major ports. The expeditions were extraordinarily expensive. The treasure ships, the support vessels, the crews, the Chinese goods exchanged, all required massive imperial investment. The financial burden was felt in Beijing. By the late 1420s, the imperial court was divided over the value of the expeditions. The Confucian bureaucratic faction argued the voyages were a waste of resources. The eunuch faction, led by Zheng himself, argued they were necessary for diplomatic reach and trade. The Yongle emperor died in 1424. His successor Hongxi initially suspended the voyages. Hongxi died 10 months into his reign. His successor Xuande resumed the voyages briefly and dispatched the 7th expedition in 1431. Zheng died on the return journey, probably in late 1433. After Zheng's death, the political balance in Beijing shifted decisively against the maritime expeditions. The Confucian bureaucrats won the argument. The shipyards were ordered closed. The treasure ships were left to decay. The records of the voyages, including Zheng's own logbooks and detailed sea charts, were ordered destroyed. By the late 15th century, the Chinese navy that had dominated the Indian Ocean had effectively disappeared. The reasons for the abandonment have been debated by historians for generations. The expensive cost was real. The Confucian ideological hostility